Good morning. If you could take your seats, I'd like to get started. What a great crowd for a Saturday morning. I'm glad you're all here. Okay, I'd like to call this special meeting of Saturday, February 28th, 2015 to order. This is a noticed meeting, so if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Francisco, Hart, Hotchkiss, here. Murillo, here. Rouse, White, here. Mayor Schneider, here.
Thank you. If there is any public comment on an item not on today's agenda, now's your chance. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the regular public comment, and for now, I'm just going to turn it over to Ms. Schmidt and Mr. Kalan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Schneider, council members. My name is Christy Schmidt. I'm the Director of Administrative Services for the City of Santa Barbara. And today on our agenda, we have two speakers. The first is Ariel Kalan, who is our city attorney. Ariel will be talking about the issue of district elections and a little bit about the history of why we're here today. We also have Doug Johnson, who's the president of National Demographics Corporation, and we'll be here to talk about district drawing in general and also about the district drawing tools that we have available on our website and in paper and pen format if you'd like to submit a district map. After each of their presentations, we will have questions and answers with them, so you'll have plenty of time to ask the questions about their presentations. And afterwards, we'll have the public comment, public hearing portion of the program. And then we'll adjourn. But after we adjourn, if you'd like to stay for some staff assistance on the paper and pen district drawing, we have some maps and we have staff here who can help with the paper and pen district drawing if you're interested in staying around. That's not mandatory. If you're more interested in taking the maps home and doing them yourself, you can do that, or going online and working with our districting tool. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kalan. And here you go.
Good morning. Thank you, Christy. My name's Ariel Kalan. I've been the city attorney here about a year. Before that, I spent 26 years as a city attorney in Rancho Palos Verdes, Palo Alto, California, Boulder, Colorado, and Ventura most recently. Beginning, what I'd like to do is kind of set the stage, and this is a touch loud. If you could turn it down. Move closer to the mic. Is that better? Okay, thank you. Beginning, I'd like to set the stage a little bit and open it up for questions. Beginning in April of 2014, the City Council started considering whether to offer the voters a ballot measure that would allow for the creation of what are called by-district elections. A by-district election means that you only vote for candidates who reside in the same geographically bounded district where you live. The council held a public workshop right here in the Faulkner Gallery, and several dozen residents expressed their views for and against district elections. At that time, the council split on a 3-3 vote on the question of whether to put on the November 2014 ballot district elections for the people to choose or not. So at that time, the council was not able to go forward with putting district elections in front of the voters. But the council continued its consideration of district elections throughout May, June, and July of 2014, working its way towards how to address the problem. But as you all know, by the end of July 2014, the city had been sued by a group of plaintiffs under the California Voting Rights Act, and that's the operative law that we're dealing with, not federal law at the moment, but the California Voting Rights Act. That lawsuit is called Banales versus City of Santa Barbara, and it alleges that the current at-large voting system, and an at-large voting system is one where everyone in the city votes for each candidate. It alleges that at-large voting system leads to unlawful Latino vote dilution, and that is, It's alleged that at-large voting weakens the constitutional and statutory voting rights of Latino citizens so that they have difficulty electing their preferred candidates to the city council. That's the nutshell of the lawsuit. The at-large elections cause something called vote dilution that prevent the 38% of Latinos in Santa Barbara from electing the candidate of their choice. The Voting Rights Act also provides that in certain circumstances, a city can be ordered by a court to switch from at-large elections, like Santa Barbara has now, to district elections. So it broadly empowers the courts to order the city council, notwithstanding the charter and notwithstanding the voters' power, to go ahead and switch to district elections. Last fall, after the lawsuit was filed, the city council decided to go ahead and put the question of district elections on the ballot for the fall of this year, the fall of 2015. So it wasn't able to reach a conclusion to put it on the ballot last year. After the lawsuit, it decided to go ahead and put it on the ballot. But when we got to court in December, the judge felt like it would be unfair to wait until November 2015 to let the voters weigh in. So in December, the court ordered a trial for April 6th of this year. The specific statements the judge made were that she wanted to allow time for a remedy to be put in place for the November 2015 election if the plaintiffs were successful in their case. So the council's effort to put it on the ballot in 2015 was somewhat undercut by the court's action. Now, when the council ordered this on the election, it also directed a couple of things. The council directed the city clerk and myself to prepare the necessary ballot measure, but it also directed Paul Casey, the city administrator, to design and run a public engagement process so that the public would have a chance to weigh in. The difficulty with a court process is, of course, there's a limited opportunity for the public to weigh in. And the council is very concerned with maximizing opportunities to hear from the public. So these workshops were originally designed to facilitate that process. We're here today because the city council fought to make sure that the public's opportunities to participate would be the maximum possible. Well, since the court's action in December, we have entered into a settlement agreement with the plaintiffs in the lawsuit in order to avoid the very costly and divisive process of going through a full trial. The settlement calls for the city to begin district elections this November, but it allows for and requires the city to go through a public process that will allow you to help guide the city council in designing the boundaries of the district election boundaries. So let me talk a little bit more about that. As I mentioned, these workshops and public hearings were originally designed to flesh out the 2015 ballot measure. But now that we have entered into a settlement agreement, it's really unclear whether that ballot measure will happen. So the purpose of these workshops has shifted from gaining broader public comment about district elections in general to being very focused on what the district boundaries ought to look like. As it turns out, state law was amended effective January 1, 2015 to require the city to conduct 2 general public hearings and 1 hearing in front of the city council on the question of what district boundaries would look like, even if they were ordered by a court. So whether we were lucky or just had good foresight, the public process the council ordered last fall actually became incorporated into state law January 1st. And so we have a series of 4 workshops and hearings planned. Today, March 18th, those sessions will not be city council hearings. but a majority of the city council may be here. The purpose of these sessions is several-fold, and I'll talk about that in a second. What we're trying to accomplish today is this. I've been asked to provide an overview of the settlement agreement, and I'm going to do that in just a minute without delay. And I'm happy to answer questions about the settlement. I've put copies of the city's media release in the back of the room. You're welcome to take a copy that tries to explain the settlement as well. Next, our demographic expert, Doug Johnson, Doug, raise your hand, will do several important things. He's going to describe more about district elections and what they mean, and he'll demonstrate and train us on how to use a web-based tool that the city has made available for you to draw districts on your own. I've also placed at the back of the room 3 different district plans, hard copies 8.5 by 11s, plans, drafts 1, 2, and 3. Those are for you to take and look at to begin to get a sense of how the mapping process might work. You can comment on those plans. We have a comment sheet in the back of the room, and we'd love to get your feedback on them. In addition, you can revise them using the online tool or paper mapping tools that we're going to talk about later. So with that background, let me describe the settlement agreement. Last Tuesday, the City Council agreed to enter into a partial settlement agreement. It is partial because, unfortunately, of the 5 plaintiffs, only 4 were willing to sign the settlement. Cruzito Herrera Cruz has chosen not to cooperate in the settlement process and not to sign the settlement agreement. So we've had to work around his non-participation in order to resolve the case. The settlement agreement has several key points, and I want to detail those for you. First, the city has agreed to implement district elections for 6 council districts, with the mayor being elected at large. So really, not much will change for the mayor's election, but for the 6 council members, they will be elected from districts or by districts. Only 3 of those districts are going to be on the ballot this fall. Second, and most importantly, I think, for your purposes, the settlement agreement says it's the intention of the city and of the plaintiffs that we will draw 2 majority-minority districts and place those on the ballot this fall. What do I mean by a majority-minority district? A majority-minority district is one where Latino voters are a majority of the eligible voters. I'm talking about voters, citizen voters, not about the general population. So when you look at those district plans that are in the back of the room, it will be apparent that there's been an effort made by the city in preparing those draft plans to comply with the intention of the settlement that there be 2 majority-minority districts. And if you are looking at the plans, districts 1 and 3 are the 2 majority-minority districts. Third part of the settlement agreement is this civic engagement process. One of the things that made the settlement process take as long as it did was the City Council's insistence that we have maximum public participation. The Council recognizes that this is indeed a massive change in city government and in the political structure of the city. So these 4 workshops are really intended to bring out as much public participation as we can have. And it's necessary both under state law, but it's welcome under the Council's direction as well. Finally, under the settlement agreement, the city's obligated to pay about $600,000 in attorney's fees and costs. That's a big number, but I can assure you that other cities have paid over $3 million, close to $4 million in similar situations. So I would not be truthful if I didn't say that keeping costs down was one of the reasons the City Council agreed to settle the case. There's no choice under state law. If the plaintiffs are successful in this kind of case, attorney's fees have to be paid. So that was the landscape we were dealing with. That's all I wanted to lead with. I'd be happy to answer questions about the settlement or any other process questions before we turn it over to Mr. Johnson.
If you have questions for Mr. Kalan, please feel free to come up here to the podium and ask your questions. Okay. All right, moving on. Mr. Johnson. Oh, wait, hold on.
Sure. My name's Mary Frank. I'm curious, as we all know, the participation in an odd versus even year elections is totally divergent, and I'm just curious if the settlement had any language in the settlement that deals with that question or that issue.
As you probably know, the voters of Santa Barbara would have to make the decision whether to switch from from odd year elections to even year elections. The settlement agreement doesn't preclude the voters from doing that, but it does not ask the court to mandate a switch to even year elections. So even year elections are not part of the settlement agreement.
You want to approach? Yes.
As I understood it, we're not going to have a total election this time. We're just going to have, you said that only elections will be held in certain districts this time as opposed to a general election?
That's correct, sir. The settlement agreement calls for 3 of the 6 council districts to be placed on the ballot. 2 of those districts need to be the majority-minority districts. So looking at the map that we've handed out, districts 1 and 3, if those end up being the majority-minority districts, would be on the ballot this fall, and the council would be free to choose a 3rd district. As a practical matter, Councilmember Rouse's term is up this fall, so... Councilmember Rouse is on the ballot this fall. So in order to accommodate that, the district in which he ultimately resides will probably be on the ballot as well.
Well, I happen to know where Councilmember Rouse lives, so the area, whatever you want to call it, the district or the zone or the clan, whatever you want to call that, that district will vote. But if you live in some other area of the town, not 1 or 3, you won't be involved in this process?
That's the consequence of district elections, sir.
Okay. And I realize one question. Could you define for us the term Latino? I mean, what does it encompass? I've heard all kinds of, we all have heard lots of things.
That's a demographic question. I'm going to defer that to Mr. Johnson, and he'll address that when he remarks.
I can discuss it. All of the census data and census ethnic and racial data is self-identified. So people who identify themselves as Latino are Latino. People who do not identify themselves as Latino are not Latino. So it's all self-identification.
My name is Mickey Flax, and since you brought up the issue of Councilman Rouse, is it not true that if he were to run this time for a 4-year term, that would give him a total of 10 years, 10 consecutive years on city council, which is counter to the charter?
My predecessor gave a legal opinion that Mr. Rouse's prior service would not count against term limits.
You mean the 2 years that he served wouldn't count?
That's the opinion my predecessor gave to the council, yes.
Okay. On what basis, do you know?
I don't.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Eric Friedman, a concerned citizen. I was going to wait till the end, but since the issue of even year elections was brought up, I feel like there was a disconnect here because just a couple of weeks ago, this issue came up at the city council, and the city council members said that they would take into sorry. So my name is Eric Friedman, and I'm a concerned citizen. And the reason I'm talking now rather than the end is because the issue of even year elections was brought up. And a couple of weeks ago at the council meeting, the council debated on whether or not this process, at least as I understood it, because it got kind of confusing, I think, for everybody there, including the council members themselves, was that this process would also inform the council and they would keep an open mind into the issue of even year elections. And the issue of even year elections is important for a number of reasons. One, because it gets to the heart of this matter as well, in terms of you increase minority, all votes, but especially minority voting, and that's the whole reason, as I understand it, that the city is being forced to go into district elections. And in other jurisdictions, such as Palmdale and Visalia, as I understand it, they did go to even year elections as part of this process. So I would say if the city council, they could have either worked in the negotiations, but I take it that's a moot point now on even year elections. But if they're unable to do that or unwilling to do that, then they need to put a ballot measure on this fall. That's my request, to put a ballot measure on this fall to go to even year elections, starting with the 2017 and moving that up to the 2016. And there's a number of other reasons. One of them is fiscal as well. It saves about $250,000 per election cycle, which over $100,000 a year, which you can go into the other meetings of the infrastructure issues, where you have basically $100,000 that we're spending now to keep odd-year elections, where we can put that into even-year elections, consolidation, and use that towards infrastructure. So I'd like to see that the council discuss this at their council meeting, the issue of moving to even-year elections, put it on their agenda as an agendized item, not necessarily as part of the settlement, but in terms of how we can get that on the ballot, because things have changed since 2007 and the last time the voters voted on this. Number one, the reason we're all here in the room, and two, the infrastructure issue, I think, plays right into that. So please, City Council, put this on the agenda, the issue of even-year elections. Thank you.
And we will have more public comment later on, but if there are no more questions for Mr. Kalan? Okay. Mr. Johnson.
Good morning. It is great to see so many people out here this morning. I do these meetings all over the state. We've drawn lines for about 140 jurisdictions across California and Arizona, and this may be the biggest crowd I've had other than like the city of San Diego. So congrats to Santa Barbara for all of you coming out, and thank you for coming out. My name, again, is Doug Johnson. I'm the president of National Demographics. We do redistricting and Voting Rights Act work all across the country, but mainly in the Southwest. I often say my office is Highway 99 up and down the Central Valley, working with all those jurisdictions. So it's a pleasure to be here. This is an interesting process as we go through it. And let me see, by show of hands, did anyone go to any of the California Redistricting Commission meetings, the state commission meetings? Okay, good. So we got some people. So as you may have seen in those meetings, or if you follow that process, redistricting really happens, or districting in this case, at two levels. One is fairly straightforward. What is your neighborhood? What is your community? And how should we draw those lines? The other is a very deep, getting into the nuts and bolts of demographics and computer technology and census blocks and all that. So if some of this seems to be getting a little too deep into it, it's because we want to empower the people that really want to dive in. But as we go through this, remember, you don't have to dive into the details. We certainly welcome all the testimony, either at the what's your neighborhood and where should the lines go in the big picture, or in the nuts and bolts of let's get into the online tool and draw our own plans. So wherever you feel comfortable, we want to hear from you. The process we talked about already, the specific schedule, I just put this up here to highlight a couple of pieces of why. So we have this forum, and we're going to train you on these tools. And the reason there's a couple of weeks is to give people the time to use those tools. We want you both, if you want to, stick around after this meeting and draw plans today. But what often is the most useful feedback for the council when they're making the decision is if you go back and meet with your neighborhood group, meet with your homeowner association, meet with whatever groups you're active in the city, and come up with a plan together, and come up with what makes sense for your neighborhood and for other neighborhoods near you. So we want to give some time for those meetings to happen. It's not that nothing will be happening during the next 2 weeks. We'll be taking lots of phone calls, we hope. We'll be getting lots of messages. And as you submit plans, we will be putting those on the website. So stay involved and check the website, because as other people and groups submit their plans, things will be happening over those 2 weeks, leading into the fairly fast rush of the 3 meetings at the end. So now that you're in the phase of drawing lines, the big question is, how is that done? And just one note, too, you don't have to take detailed notes. This whole PowerPoint will go on the website on Monday, so you can refer back to it if you want to. There are really 3 things we're looking at here. The first set is the federal laws. These are what every jurisdiction in the country drawing lines has to follow. First of all is an equal number of people in each council district in this case. And it is total people, total population. It's not registered voters, it's not eligible voters, it's human beings residing in that district. There's a little bit of flexibility, but very little. And you'll find that this is a very controlling factor and limiting factor as you try to draw different lines. The second federal law is the Federal Voting Rights Act. And what this really says is for groups that what the law calls protected classes, meaning essentially Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Native Americans, if there is a neighborhood that is highly concentrated in that protected class population, that neighborhood cannot be divided in a way that reduces its electoral power, and it can't be packed in a way that wastes their votes. You can't make a 100% Latino seat so that they don't have a vote in another district. I always tell people, if you think of drawing lines by neighborhoods as much as we possibly can, you'll be safe. The law protects protected class neighborhoods, and if you violate their neighborhoods in a bad way, they can sue. But if your goal is to keep all the neighborhoods together as much as possible, then you'll be safe, and your lines will pass muster. We have, from the settlement agreement, essentially a little more specific guidelines than that vague don't dilute or pack them. And this is where the language that Mr. Colon read of we're aiming for 2 majority-minority or majority Latino seats using what's called citizen voting age population that I'll talk about, because the courts look at citizens of voting age as your eligible voter population. If you're a citizen and you're 18 or older, you're eligible to register, you're eligible to turn out and vote. Obviously, we have lots of issues in all of California and all of the country of people who don't register and don't vote, even when they are eligible. But that's the number the courts focus on, is eligible voters. So I'll get into that a little bit when we get to the online tool of how to look at that. But really where 90% of the discussion comes down is what are called traditional criteria. These are not legal requirements. These are things that the courts have said are acceptable considerations. The first is communities of interest. If you follow the state commission process, they talked about communities of interest so much that they started just calling it COI, C-O-I. And there were actually jokes about it. It sounded like the commission was talking about a fish farm because they were talking about COI so often. But that is really the most common debate, is what communities of interest, what are the borders of the communities of interest, and which communities of interest should be put together. And what is a community of interest? Well, it's a neighborhood, however the people who live there define it. There are academics all over this country desperately trying to come up with demographic studies and statistics to define communities of interest and to get the court to say their method is the one and make them famous. And every time the courts look at this, it all comes down to a neighborhood is what the people who live in that neighborhood say it is. And often the people in the neighborhood disagree even. There are a few cases, very rare, but a few cases, where a neighborhood will come in and say, this is our neighborhood, divide us. It happens most often with retirement communities, but sometimes it happens with business districts, where they say essentially, the retirement communities I love, they say, turnout in our community is 99.9% in the election. Don't waste all our votes in one seat. We want to be major players in 2 seats. And there was a famous hearing at the Arizona Commission with, I don't know if the Sun Cities were big enough to each be a majority of 3 different legislative districts. And it was pretty clear if the commission put them all together and packed them into one, there were going to be some walkers and canes beating the commissioners before they left that meeting. So it does happen. We also get business communities, downtown areas in particular, that sometimes come in and say, this is downtown, but we want multiple council members to have a stake in what's going on downtown. Pasadena is the big example of this, with their Colorado Boulevard renovations that they've done since the, I guess, late 70s. And so for 3 decades, their council districts all have touched Colorado Boulevard so that each council member had a stake in it. So when you talk about communities of interest, if you do think of a community of interest and want it to have a say in multiple districts, definitely mention that as you go through this process. But as I said, 90% or so of communities, or even more, of communities of interest say, put us all together, keep us together as one neighborhood so we can speak with one voice and have the maximum voice in one council member's election. The other criteria are more, well, the next 3 criteria are more for simplicity for the voters. Make it easy for the voters to understand their districts and to get involved in district elections. So compact, meaning keep the districts square, ideally round, but that's obviously impossible. So keep them reasonably shaped, so they're not too bizarrely looking. Contiguous, we don't want a piece here and a piece there. The pieces need to touch. And then following visible boundaries, either natural or man-made. Things like follow rivers, freeways, major roads, cliff sides, any kind of visible boundary. The real goal when you're thinking of this is, if someone wants to get involved in an election and says, candidate X is a great candidate, I want to go knock on doors and get my neighbors to knock on doors with me to support that candidate. We want it to be really easy for that person to tell their friends, hey, let's knock on doors in District 1. District 1 goes from the freeway to Main Street. Then if they have to say, well, it goes the freeway, and then it cuts up A Street and goes over First Street and goes up B Street, and you end up knocking on doors that aren't in the district. So that's really the goal of being compact, contiguous, and following major features. The last traditional criteria, we call it continuity in office. This is the fact that the voters have elected the current council. And it should be up to the voters to decide whether a council member gets reelected or not, those that aren't term limited out, of course. And so the process of drawing lines, to the degree possible, should avoid pairing current council members, because then you're telling the voters, you elected these 2 before, you can only have one of them anymore in the next election. So again, the traditional criteria are not requirements, so it's not against the law to pair council members, but these are things that the courts have looked at and said these are traditional, or sometimes called good government, criteria for drawing lines, and things that are perfectly acceptable to consider. They can also justify very small 2 or 3% deviations in your population from perfect balance. So these are the criteria that hopefully will guide you as you draw the lines, and the council will have to follow as they consider which plan to select. We do have 3 drafts to kind of get the discussion going and start getting input from people. So the first one, you can see, hopefully you grabbed some of the paper maps. These are online. We are actually, these are going online on Monday. And you can see up here on the link, and this link will be on the city website, hopefully on Monday as well, where you can have your 8.5 by 11. We can also click on these links that will be on the website and see if it switches over. There we go. And for those that don't want to log in and get into the complicated drawing system I'll show later, there is a simple viewer that allows you, almost as if Google Maps, you can't draw anything in this simple system, but you can zoom in, you can find your neighborhood, and what's getting online these days is getting a little bit scary. But you can really zoom in to see the details of exactly where that border goes in any given area. So we do have just an online viewer if you want to see more detail than is in the slides or in the 8.5 by 11s. We do keep them 8.5 by 11 so that people can grab them off the web and print them themselves. That's the main reason for the size. So just to quickly go through this, I'm happy to go through it in more detail if there's questions later on, but I want to get through the presentation. The idea in all three plans is really a kind of eastern to the shore, District 1. This is one of the majority Latino seats. District 2 would then be, essentially, they divide at the pier. Take the pier and go along to the western edge of town and up into the hills in this case. District 3, again, starts at State and goes really kind of roughly along the freeway, west and then northwest. 4 is the eastern hills and coming down into downtown. 5 is the northwest hills area. And you can see, it's a little hard to read on the screen, but on the maps you can see the neighborhood names from those are the neighborhoods as defined in the general plan. And then 6, in this case, really starts downtown and then wraps around to come into the Bel Air area. And the general spreading of the seats is fairly similar in all three plans. It doesn't have to be. You can go radical and get extreme in your plans if you'd like. Plan 2, the big change is between 2, 3, and 6. In this case, 3 comes down and picks up the City College and the housing that's right next to that, and is a little bit narrower, and it really is essentially the west side of the freeway as it goes through town. 6 does not wrap around in this case, so this keeps a more 6 compact from downtown along. At first it starts on both sides of State, and then it becomes the west side of State. And then 2 in this case is a little more compact because it's not coming over to pick up all that population from the City College and on the other side of the City College. Draft 3, as you may have spotted, in drafts 1 and 3, districts 1 and 3 are identical. So those 2 seats are identical in both plans. The difference is what happens to the rest of the districts. And in this case, you can see, again, 6 is not wrapping around in this case. It's more just right along the western side of State Street. But in this case, as in the first map, 3 does not pick up the City College. 2 comes around and picks that up. So these are starting to get the discussion going. If you get into the numbers, there are limited ways to draw the 2 majority-minority seats that have been agreed to. So in terms of districts 1 and 3, there's some flexibility, but not a ton, as you'll see if you get into numbers. But there's lots of flexibility in the rest of the city. So we're definitely looking for your input in what works, what doesn't work. As you somewhat see in these drafts, though, with those traditional criteria, it's impossible to comply with all of them. There is no map that is perfectly compact, follows major roads and visible features, and respects every community of interest. So with the federal requirements in the settlement agreement, of course, we have to do those. We have to comply with those legal requirements. The traditional criteria is balancing. Which plan best balances those criteria? So some people may lean towards, let's follow neighborhood lines here, even though the neighborhood sometimes has unusual shapes. And some people may lean towards being more compact. That's a choice, and so we want to hear from you which maps you think do the best job of balancing all of those choices. Because it's impossible to keep every neighborhood together given the equal population requirement, and it's physically impossible to draw perfectly square districts unless you're Iowa, essentially. So getting into the tools. I mentioned that there's really two levels that we operate in redistricting. One is a general, what's your neighborhood, and which plan best treats your neighborhood. The other is getting into the nuts and bolts. So for the general, kind of what's your neighborhood, if you don't want to get into the complicated online system, we have these black and white pages back there. They're black and white so that everyone can print them at home, even if you don't have a color printer. And also so that you can fax them in, if people still want to fax them in. I learned that the first time I made a color version and got 20 of them faxed in and couldn't read any of them. You learn things quickly when you do a lot of these projects. So what you're looking at here is a map of the neighborhoods as defined in the general plan. And below each neighborhood name is a number that is more or less the population of that neighborhood. So there's two things you can do with this map. One is, don't worry about the math. Ignore the numbers. Just say, what I think works best is if you have this neighborhood together in a district, or these three neighborhoods together in a district. Just suggest it, send it in. Obviously, a plan that doesn't have the right population numbers can't be adopted by the council, but it can be a quick and easy way to share your thoughts, and the council can take into consideration, hey, these people would like to see a map that has these neighborhoods together, and we'll work out the details as much as we can. The other, as is mentioned in the bottom right, is to, in the instructions box, is to try to use the numbers to ballpark, get close to our target population of 14,735 people per district. Obviously, the neighborhoods are big numbers. They're all in the thousands, so you're not going to get 14,735 exactly using this simple tool. But we wanted to be simple and easy and give you a guide if you wanted to do some math and try to get to either a district or draw a whole citywide plan. Noted down there is feel free to indicate I want to divide this neighborhood. So if you get 3 neighborhoods and there are 13,000 people, you can then say, well, to get the balance, I need to get 1,000 more people from this neighborhood. Just put a note in the comment section saying, hey, I wanted to take 1,000 people from downtown to finish my district. Please do that. And when I get these maps and when my staff get these maps and put them in the computer, we'll follow your directions and send the map back to you to make sure we got it right. You can also say, I don't like where the general plan defines this neighborhood. I think the real border is over here. And so you can say, draw the line through this neighborhood along State Street, or whatever street you think makes sense as the appropriate border. And when we go into the computer, we'll do that for you, and we'll send it back to you to make sure we got it right. So this is just a quick and easy tool for people that want to share their thoughts, draw some lines, either a district, a whole citywide plan, or even just draw your neighborhood. If you disagree with the general plan's neighborhood boundary definitions, draw your neighborhood on here and just send it in saying, this isn't a plan, it's just my definition of my neighborhood, please keep it together in whatever plan you adopt. So very simple, pretty straightforward, hopefully. At the bottom is the contact information, and we do need these by March 12th. So we are asking everyone to get them turned in by March 12th so we can compile all this information and have it all ready for our follow-up forum. Down in the bottom left is submitted by and your contact information. This is optional, but I do recommend you put it in because this is not a precise tool. And if you try to get your numbers right and you're off for some reason, we'll put it in the computer and see that. And if you provide your contact information, we'll send it back to you and say, here's the plan you submitted. A, did we input it right? And B, heads up, your numbers are a little off. Do you want to adjust your plan? And if we can tell what you were going for, we'll actually try to adjust it for you. Say, hey, we tried to fix it. Did we do it in a way that you like, that you want to send in as your revised map? So we're here to help. This is all very interactive, which is also why I say send your maps in early, as fast as you can. Because if you send it in on the 12th, I can't send it back to you and say, hey, there's a problem, do you want to fix it? The deadline's passed. If you send it in by the 5th, we'll have a whole week to go back and forth and refine it. So, very straightforward tool. I highlighted on the screen here the deadline and the contact information to send it in. Actually, send it into the city clerk's office. They will get all the information in, send it off to me and my staff and to the city attorney's office and make sure that it all gets circulated. And of course, compiled for the city council when this all goes to them. because everything does go to them. There's no screening or selection of plans. Well, when we go to council, we'll probably have some recommended plans, but all of the plans will go to council. And believe me, councils feel perfectly free to go with whatever plan they want, and to mix and match. So, any questions on the paper tool before I get in a little more deeply in the online tool? Why don't you come up to the... Oh. Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Handheld mic.
Oh. Yeah, this is all being recorded for City TV. So
In all of the written material, there's no URL to get into the system. So I don't know why it isn't there, but I think you should give it to everybody.
yes. So it's a good question. Part of the challenge, as you probably have detected, is that this process is moving very fast. This is actually far and away the fastest deployment of an online redistricting tool that ESRI has ever done. And so the URLs and things like that, literally we just nailed them down at 9:30 last night. I was having conversations where I'm like, I am presenting this in 11 and a half hours, including driving to Santa Barbara. So yes, all of the URLs that you've seen and all of these PDF maps and everything will be on the city website on Monday. And some of it already is. Let me take you to the city page. So this is the current page. We're live on the internet. And this actually went up Thursday, I think. So this is a bunch of information about the schedule. You can see the schedule. There are links to what's happened before, to the council materials from before. This is where these maps will go up, and the links to those interactive pages will be added here. And also on here, you see in the second paragraph where it talks about the public input website. So this is the online tool I'll go into. But before I jump into this, any other questions about the paper tool or things like that? And the paper tool will go on the website as well. You grab the mic here.
Yeah, that's a pretty speedy process. Are you going to have any hearings or outreach in the neighborhoods? Are you going to like set up the back of a fire truck on the mesa or something like that? Ask what people think.
Christy will take it.
Oh, okay, perfect.
We have the 4 meetings, but we don't have plans to go out into the neighborhoods. We have a really short timeline for getting this all wrapped up.
Let me add to that, though, that we are, as your consultants, we're here to help. So if there are individuals, I and my staff can actually web screen share. So if you, especially if you get in the online tool and run into problems or trying to figure something out, if you get in touch with us, we'll set up a meeting time and we'll meet online and we'll walk you right through it all. So we found it's actually more useful to be on the computers than at the firehouse, because I've sat all alone for hours at lots of firehouses. So.
Bonnie Raisin, will you, Dr. Chris? I'm just curious, and please explain deviations of up to 5%. In other words, the target populations, what is the mandate? I mean, how is that done?
Sure. It's a good question. So what the courts have said, well, at first they said you plus or minus 5%. As long as you were within those numbers, you were fine. Then people started to get a little too creative, and so the court said, no, there's no safe harbor. Oh, the U.S. Supreme Court. The court. So they said, no playing games with that. The populations need to be as close to balance as they can while achieving your other goals. So if you are off by 2%, it needs to be you're off by 2% to keep neighborhood X together. If you're off by 1.5%, it needs to be we're off by 1.5% to keep this seat more compact. So whatever is the minimum amount of difference that can achieve your goal, whatever that individual goal might be, is what you have to do. So plus or minus 5%, the courts have said it's assumed that the plan is legal. Someone that's sued to overturn the plan would have to prove why it's unconstitutional. Once you go beyond that, then the burden of proof shifts to the jurisdiction and it gets messy. So that's the most deviation you should have. Of course, in your plans, especially if you're using a paper map, that's a really small window to have to hit. So feel free to come close and just say, hey, I know I'm not perfect, but this is what I want. Clean it up for me, and we'll do it on the computer for you. Does that help?
My question is...
Oh. Sorry.
So, regarding the minority mandate, so where else in the country, this is a huge question, understanding California the best, being a native, where else in the country and what other minorities have influenced the drawing of lines? For example, where there is a Puerto Rican, where there may be Italian, how has that influenced, if you have that information just briefly, throughout the last, 25?
Yeah, I would say everywhere that there is a protected class population, they're covered by that federal law. I really want to add anything, but so every nook and neighborhood of the country.
Aren't district elections for huge municipalities like LA? Do we need one, and didn't the people say they didn't vote, that they didn't want district elections?
The question was, didn't the people in Los Angeles say that they did not want district elections? Is that correct? Oh, here. Go ahead.
Oh. No, I was saying, aren't district elections for big municipalities like LA? Why don't we need one, and didn't the people vote saying they didn't want one? And I think we would have minorities, but the vote got split in the last election, and also few minorities run, and when they do, I think they're a little bit too right-wing for Santa Barbara.
Well, don't forget you have a Latino on the council. The California law does not differentiate depending on size of the jurisdiction. I actually have one school district that had 258 registered voters. We do 3 trustee areas with about 68 to 90 registered voters per trustee area. So it's the way the law is written. It applies to everyone.
I'm not sure you can answer this, but it occurred to me to ask this. Do the plaintiffs have their own maps, or will they submit their own maps in the process? And therefore, is the council's map the definitive one, or is there another part of the game that has to still be played out?
I'll take that. Thank you. I understand that the plaintiffs will be submitting maps through this process. The settlement agreement encourages them to do that. The ultimate decision is the city council's, but if the map adopted by the city council is not acceptable to the plaintiffs, they can challenge that in court on April 6th.
So will we know what the plaintiff's positions will be? Is the public going to...
When they submit them, you will know that they are the plaintiff's submission. We haven't received anything that we can identify as the plaintiff's submission yet.
Let me try to limit this a little bit too, because we're going to have full-blown Q&A at the end. I do want to see if people have questions about the paper tool and the criteria before I go into the online tool. Then we'll come back to the general discussion, because we do want to have a big general discussion, certainly. But any questions about the tool? Hold on for the mic. Yes.
Is there a version of this map and mapping tool in Spanish?
The mapping tool, no. But actually, my vice president, Mr. Levitt, is fluent in Spanish and fluent on the website. So if there's a group that only speaks Spanish that wants to work on this, he will work over the phone or in person with them. But no, it's simply cost prohibitive for ESRI to have developed it. It is one thing worth noting. this is not the city programmers developing the site. This is a private company. We're using a tool that they provide. They don't have a Spanish option.
I just wanted to ask, so these 3 maps you've done, is that correct? Who came up with these drafts? You?
Well, working with the attorney, the legal team, and
Right.
the city staff. Yes,
Right.
these are drafts to get the discussion going.
Okay, so, and if we have input, we can just say, well, I like Plan 2, but I'd like to see X done. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And that actually raises a good point of we do welcome comments of I like this map best and that one worst, but it's much more useful if you say why. Because the council will not be picking just between these 3. They can actually, do map 1 but fix this neighborhood kind of thing. There's a lot of flexibility still. So if there's any questions about the tool, I'll take those now, and otherwise I'll jump into the online tool, and then we'll get to the wide-ranging discussion. Okay. Let me... So, first of all, as I mentioned, the online system is a very powerful and fairly complicated tool. This is the easiest to use of the options that are out there for this. So don't feel like you have to use it. We are welcoming all input in whatever form. To use it, it is based in Adobe Flash, which, my apologies, unfortunately means no Mac access. Actually just learned that last night from the team. Oh, is it working with Mac? Fantastic. Oh, okay. ESRI told me yesterday it didn't work on Macs. So this is, thank you. For those watching on TV, she just said that's not true. She's actually using it on a Mac right now. So that's good to see. Okay, so on some Macs it'll work. You do have to create an account and a password to get in because you are essentially creating your own little universe of saving plans and all that. So you do have to set up an account. You also have to allow pop-ups. On my computer, it hasn't been a problem, but on some computers, you do have to go in and turn off your pop-up blocker. So those are pretty basic system requirements. It's just an internet browser. You're not downloading anything to use the system. When you first log in, and I'll switch over to the system in a second, it just asks you for very basic information. Your name, your email address, so that if you do need to reset your password, it can send you the new password. And it also sends you confirmations of when you submit a plan or when someone wants to share a plan with you. So it does ask for an email address, and then just like anything, a username and a password. When you log in, actually, let me switch over. I'll do this part actually live on the site, assuming all goes well. The nervous moment when you try to log in. Right. So this is the login page, and we'll come in, and it will give you 2 things when you first log in. One is this, what they call the Learn page. You see the Learn tab up here at the top. This is some basic information. Right now, it's actually ESRI's standard language. As I said, we just got this up and running at 9:30 last night. But we will be customizing this a little bit to put the schedule and things like that in there next week. And it also gives you an option of what plan do you want to start with. Do you want to start with a blank plan, start from scratch? Or do you have a preferred one of the 3 samples that you want to start from and modify? One of the sometimes odd things of the system is it will ask you this each time. So if you start and you draw your own plan, when you come back in, it will ask you this again. It doesn't matter, so it won't start with the plan you're drawing. You have to do that the next step. So don't worry when you get this screen and it doesn't list your plan. You do that at the next step. So you just choose whichever one you want. Open up the plan. It creates your own copy of it. You're not actually modifying the official copy. You're not modifying anything that anyone else will see, and they won't see your work until you choose to share it. So it chooses a plan and gives you back this language in case you want to read it. One of the tricks of the system is they don't at the bottom say, okay, I'm ready to draw. You have to know to go up here. keep in mind, this is why it's good you're here, keep in mind that up here is the key to everything. So this create button is where you want to go. So you can always go back to learn and see the notes that they gave, but create, you have to know to click on create. And when you do that, you get this screen. It's actually bigger on your home screen, and because we're on a projector, the screen dimensions are a little limited. But you have a whole bunch of information here. If you chose a blank map, the whole thing will be one color, and all the population will be unassigned. Because we're using a map that already exists, you have all these districts. Over here, you have a couple of useful things. This is your district statistics window. It's this districts button. That turns it on, turns it off. You'll flip that on and off to get it out of the way and get it back quite a bit. But it tells you your deviations, and everything that's underscore P means percentage. So percentage deviation, I talked about plus or minus 5% is really as far as you want to go. In this case, we're at 1.93 or 1.95 under and 1.8 above. There used to be big debates about how to measure deviation, and thankfully the U.S. Supreme Court just stepped in and said, this is the way you will do it. What only matters is your biggest and smallest. The 4 seats that are in between, don't worry about them. It's just is your biggest district 5% or less overpopulated? Is your smallest district 5% or less underpopulated? You can also change the colors. If you click on one of these links, you get this handy-dandy little window. I've actually had clients that were colorblind or partially colorblind, and so they use this to create the most fluorescent neon maps you've ever seen, but it worked for them. Hideous, but it made it functional. And then hide and lock. Hide is almost never used. Lock is handy. Once you get a district just the way you want, you don't want to accidentally click on something and mess it up. So once a seat is the way you like it, like say you just want to go with 1 and 3 to be sure you're compliant, and then you want to mess with the rest. You lock those. See how they got the shading on them? They have the lines across them now. They're locked, and you can't, by mistake, move part of them and mess up what you drew. So this is pretty basic. Total population, how close are you to the target? What's your deviation from the target population? And what's your percentage? We have tons of other data in here. Lots of stuff from the census, lots of stuff from the American Community Survey. If you go in here, each of these categories has a different thing. Universe is total counts. We get a bunch of different counts from the Census Bureau. So this is the number of people, number of households, total 18 and above, all different total counts. Population, this is your total population. NH, you'll see a lot. That stands for non-Hispanic. You may remember in 2010 census, people got to mark multiple races and could mark as many races as they wanted and Hispanic. So what we do in redistricting, because the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice told us to do it this way, is that if you mark Hispanic or Latino, you're counted as Hispanic or Latino, and everything else you mark is ignored. If you mark anything else and white, you're counted as anything else. If you mark only one other race and white. If you mark African American and Native American or any mix that doesn't involve white, then you become multi-race. So that's where these numbers come in. So NH you'll see a lot. It means non-Hispanic, people who did not mark Hispanic and marked whatever category is listed. So in here we have all kinds of stuff. If you want to draw a district focused around people that take public transit to work, you can get a percentage of count and percentage of people who commute by public transit. Work at home. In terms of the agreement, the settlement agreement, if you want to see, do I have 2 majority Latino eligible voter seats, what we look at is, as I mentioned, citizens of voting age, or CVAP. It's the other term that if you follow the state commission, you heard all the time is CVAP, CVAP, CVAP. Citizens of voting age. So this is where you can see your counts, and more importantly, the percentages in these seats. And anything that you check in here automatically appears over here. So now it's expanded, and if I make these spaces a little bigger, one of the oddities, just to give you a heads up, one of the oddities in this system is that it does not like to divide by 0. It doesn't catch that well. So you see where it says that the unassigned has 0 population is minus 6.72%. It's a weird thing because of how it handles dividing by 0 errors. So don't worry about that. Obviously, there's 0 people and 0 Hispanics. So you get in the percentages. You see here District 1 is 50.25 and District 3 is 48.14. We've had various discussions about exactly how to count this data. This is ballpark data because it's from a survey, and how do you round off the fractions and account for error. So the database that we had to send over to get ready for this system a couple weeks ago is a little bit different than the one we've agreed with the plaintiffs on. So when it says 48.14 for Area 3, by the newer data that we've worked out with the plaintiffs, it's actually 50.1. So don't worry about getting precise. We can play with things at the end in front of council if there's any concern about it. But as long as you're getting really 48, 49%, once we switch it into the more recent data that wasn't available for this system, you'll be at 50. So when you're shooting for those 2 majority seats, try to get at least 47. If you get 48.1, we already know that will get you to 50 when we update the data. It's just part of the crazy timeline we're under for this project. So that shows you how you can add in any categories. Obviously, you can do the Hispanic CVAP if you want to be very careful on the settlement language concerns. But there's all kinds of stuff in there. There is Spanish spoken at home, Asian languages spoken at home, household income, renters versus owners, single-family houses versus multifamily houses. Whatever data you want to look at, we can kick it into this map, and you can see it on here. And you bring that up with this demographics button. Just clear that out for a moment. I talked about this kind of hidden create button up here. The other hidden button that you may or may not want to use is this one over here, which I actually didn't know about until I got on the phone and said, well, how do I get this map up? And they said, click on that. If you know GIS and you know ArcGIS, the stuff in here will look very familiar. If not, you can kind of ignore everything except for the Santa Barbara overlays. So in here, we have our neighborhood map. You'll see if I zoom in. It's actually showing those general plan neighborhoods, Laguna, downtown, Upper East. That's here. If you don't want to see that, just use this little arrow to bring up the mystery menu and turn it on and off. There's also this Hispanic CVAP percentage. Let me go and uncheck these. So in terms of looking to comply with it, if your numbers are coming up short, you can turn that on, and the darker the shading, the more Latino that census block is. So that can help you with that. And that is the main map that's in this mystery menu. So just remember, and you'll see it, the PowerPoint that I'm using actually highlights this. So if you forget where it is, just go to the website and go through this. Let me come back to questions because of the mic issue. Okay, so that is this part, demographics and districts and the hidden thing. How do I actually draw the lines? The fun part. You have a couple of different tools. First is you have to choose which district you want to put an area into. So you can choose to move something. Let's say I'm going to move a neighborhood from 6 to 4. You click on I want it to go into 4. You can also, by the way, click on unassigned if you just want to dump it into a big pool. But for now, let's say 4. And then you get these 4 little icons down here are the key to what you're doing. If you want to be very precise, really if you're at the end of your map and you're just doing things precisely, click this tool with a little dot, moves one census block at a time. And if we had the districts up, you'd be seeing these numbers change as I click. So District 4, you can see 15,070, 15,180. It's going up as I click. Very precise, slow tool. The next one is very useful in some jurisdictions, not so useful here in Santa Barbara. It's draw by rectangle. And unfortunately, all of you are tilted to one side, so rectangles don't work all that well. But if you want to draw a rectangle, it will pick up everything inside that rectangle, or touching the rectangle. Obviously, not so useful here. So, the next one is more useful here. This is select by Polygon, so let me put those guys back into 6. This looks a little funny. It takes 1 or 2 tries to get the hang of it, but you just draw and it will make a polygon. So then you can get more of a shape that matches your geography shape here. You double click and boom, all those folks have gone into 6. And then the last of the tools is a line. This one is pretty handy. Everything that this line touches will get moved. So it's a lot faster than clicking one by one, but it's still very precise. And look, I missed one. So there you go. So keep in mind, these are your 4 key tools. And they're all select. And if you put your mouse over it, it'll pop up. Select by clicking. Select by a rectangle. Select by a polygon. Or select by, of course, they're programmers. They call it a polyline. It's not just a line. And you can lock right here. If you want to lock a district, you can lock or unlock it here. If you're drawing from a blank map, the thing that gets everyone is they miss one tiny little block somewhere. If you start with the drafts, you don't have to worry about it. They're all assigned. But if you're drawing from a blank map, we have this handy other tool. Let me set it up. So I just made those unassigned. They're not in any district. This little binoculars here says, okay, I can see in my districts that I've got some population that's not assigned, and I can't see it on the map. Where the heck are these people? This little thing will zoom you right to it and give you a list. As you click on each one, it moves to that block. So when you're down at the end and you can't find that unassigned population, the little binoculars is your friend. So those are the main tools. The rest of this is pretty much like stuff you probably used in the web before. You can zoom way out. So you have zoom in, zoom out, or the hand. If you've used Adobe Acrobat, you've probably seen these things. The hand just moves you around. You can slide from side to side. Zoom out. You can either click or you can draw a box, and it will zoom out to get that box in the window. This one is handy if you zoom by mistake. Go back to my previous view. So I was just walking back through where I was before. And zoom to the plan to show me the whole thing. So those are pretty handy. You've seen things like that before. This is all preset. Over here, you can see how the numbers, it's showing the population of each district. If you don't want to see that, you just uncheck it. A lot of this you can just play with. There are a lot of features in here, and I'm going to go quickly through the other items. But you can display the names, you can hide the names, you can shorten names to just D versus district. These are all just display things. It's display lines. If you're really zoomed in closely, it's useful. Over here, if you've ever used ArcGIS Online or Bing or any of those map services, you know they have all kinds of things. Right now, we just have this streets map. But the guys are actually going to work this weekend, and next week we'll have up a variety of things so you can get your aerial imagery. So if you want to see your lines over a satellite picture or an aerial picture, that'll be up there, a topographical map. So base maps right now, there's only the one, but starting next week we'll get a whole bunch more in there so you can see satellite imagery. It's very handy when you want to see, for example, the border of District 3. You know, there's definite breaks between the single-family homes and the apartment buildings along District 3. So if you want to see those really visibly, you switch to the aerial image, and boom, you can really see where those lines are. So this is really where you're going to spend 90% of your time. And this is where you draw your plans, is in this Create tab. And just very quickly go through the others. More you probably won't remember the details of this, so just remember that something's out there, and you can go back and play around with it if you get into this. Review. Really, the best thing here is check integrity. It makes sure everything's contiguous and that each of your districts touches. So no big deal. If you do get an error message here, the one thing I've found in playing around with maps is sometimes we put parts across the county islands in with District 5, and they may not be contiguous. That's actually generally considered okay. As long as there's not another district in the way, you can jump across unincorporated land that happens to be in the middle. It really, in the city, will only happen over here if you want to pick up a little piece or follow a road rather than follow the city line. But so this may tell you you have a non-contiguous part, but you may want that. So that's okay. Just this tells you where, this is the way you check, though. You can share. This is actually pretty handy if you're working with other people. You can make a group, you manage a group, and go in and you create a group, and then it will give you an invite button, and you can invite other people who have already created logins in the system. So you're inviting, you can search for their name if you know their real or whatever name they use to make their login ID, and invite people, and you can share maps back and forth before you submit it to anyone else, so only you guys can see it. So it's a pretty handy way to collaborate. So you set up your group and then you share your plan. And you can, or your other alternative is to share it with everyone. So you can share your map with anyone who logs in the system. And the last piece, submit plan. Click on this. Oh yeah. Sorry, you got up here you have save and all this stuff. Let me save. Give it a name. Okay. So it saves. And when you submit it, this is official. So use the share to show it to other people before, if you still are messing around with it. Once you submit a plan, you can't change it anymore. You can do file, save as, and make a new copy, and then you can mess with that. But once you submit it, it's into the council. So it asks you for your name, it asks for an email address. If you want to list who else worked with you on it, you can just type in here. But what we really want is your explanation. Because what I find a lot is that someone that lives, for example, on the west side will spend hours getting the west side just right, and then will balance all the population on the east and not care about it, and not really worry about neighborhoods and that kind of stuff. And someone who lives on the east side will spend a lot of time over there, and then will just balance the west side and not really care about it. And so, if you put in here, I really wanted to keep these areas together, and then I just kind of finished the map, and you're the west side person, someone from the east side won't come in screaming, they destroyed my neighborhood. Well, you've already noted that you weren't all that worried about it. They can change it. And what we can do at council, if they want to see it, or we can do it as consultants, is put those two maps together. And so we can take the west side person's west side map and the east side person's east side map and put those together so that you have the best of both worlds. But we don't know that you're mainly focused on one area and just kind of finishing the rest of it unless you tell us. So that's why we do ask you to say, what was your goal? Where did you run into trouble? Because maybe someone else had the same goal and came up with a different way of your trouble area and all that. And then hit submit plan. Note that submit plan does not make your map public. It does not, other users won't be able to see it when you submit it. It just comes into the city and will eventually become part of the public record going to council. But it doesn't share it in the system. If you want people to be able to look at your plan and improve it, you need to submit it and you need to share it. And when we did this in Oakland, it became fascinating as people went back and forth. They would submit a map and say this was their goal, and someone else would say, I like their goal, but I think there's a better way to do it. And it went back and forth, and they had much more time. But they actually ended up going with 3 and 4 maps coming, and then eventually they all kind of came to a consensus. And then the council adopted a different map. But things didn't end so well there. But it started very well, and it was a phenomenal collaborative process, and actually the group decided, okay, this year may not be the right for what we're trying to do, but in 2021, I think it'll make more sense. And so it can be very useful to share your maps and send them around. Let me switch back to my PowerPoint and make sure I've covered everything here. So, and this PowerPoint will be going online. So this is the intro and showing you the hidden link there. The file menu, you see, create, we covered all of that. Your statistics, display that, hide them. Demographics, we went through that. Sign geography, and you can both, I have it in the PowerPoint, but if you just put the mouse over it, it'll remind you of this. Review tab, just remember your integrity. Oh, I didn't mention this, but in the review tab, there's also these markup tools. So when you're sharing a plan with someone else, you can mark it up and say, hey, what about this area? And you don't have to tell them the corner and they have to find the corner. Just use these markup tools, draw a little arrow or a circle or a polygon around the area you're talking about, and shoot that over to them. So it's fairly handy in terms of collaboration tools. Share, submit, and that's it. So I went through that pretty quickly. If anyone wants to get into it, and I was wondering if anyone would bring a laptop and be on there while I was doing this. After we have the discussion, the staff will stick around to help with the paper tools, and I'll stick around to help with the online tools when I get more into it. But let's get into discussion.
Okay, why don't we have questions come up here, and we'll have you resume your seat. And so if you have a question for Mr. Johnson before we open up public comment, if you could come up to the podium here. No, this is not the public comment. Just any questions you have for Mr. Johnson first about the input tools, and then we'll do general public comment.
When the State Redistricting Commission completed its work and it was down to the county level, in our county, staffers were made available. I don't even know if they were from the consultant or from county staff, but you could make an appointment, especially a group of people, could make an appointment to meet with a staffer who was expert at this rather complex program. And since we have, 13 days to do this, might it be possible, instead of spending most of that time learning the program, might it be possible to meet, to have a similar kind of arrangement?
The state did do that. It was actually Irvine Foundation gave them a couple $1 million to fund that. It was expensive. But if there's a group that wants to do that, we can find a way either through a web conference where we sit on the computer and on a conference call, or if need be, we can set up something in person. We're very flexible. If people are interested, we want to do whatever we can to help them get involved.
Question for Mr. Johnson?
I was noticing here on the back of this, we have voter registration and then voter turnout numbers, which I think is really helpful. But it does have voter turnout numbers for November 2012, and so given that the council seems to have decided on a settlement that would stick with odd-year elections at least for now, it would be really helpful if we could get voter turnout numbers from an odd-year election to be able to look at what that would look like in the districts.
No, it's a good point, and I agree. The trick is that data comes from the state. They actually get the voter lists from every county and compile it, and they only do it for the even year primaries and generals. And they haven't finished 2014 yet. That's why it's 2012.
Okay.
So yeah, that's all we have at this point.
Gotcha.
I notice on all three of your suggested plans that the business core of downtown, State Street, is chopped up into districts. On some of your maps, if you're on one side of State Street, you're in one district. If you're on another side of State Street, you're in another district. And if you're above this street, you're in another district, or if you're down below this district. So all three of your systems chop up the business district, or one of the main business districts of town. And I guess my comment is, does that really make any difference when we're voting, or there seems to be an inevitable consequence of chopping up downtown? Does that really matter? Could you comment on it? I call this a video game presentation that we've had here, and I don't have a grandchild that's nerdy enough to work it, so I probably won't be able to do anything with it. But other people will, and downtown, we've talked about the downtown organization. We used to have an old town and a downtown. Now we just got the one downtown organization because we all want to be one group. But this thing looks like we're going to get chopped up into pieces. And could you talk about the merits or demerits or the inevitability of that? Thank you.
I think what we'll do is shift over now to general public comments, and we wanted to begin with Plaintiff's Counsel, Mr. Barry Capella.
We'll come back to that question.
I'm Barry Capello. I represent the plaintiffs in this case. Nice to meet you, Mr. Johnson.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for your effort on behalf of the community, and our congratulations to the City Council for actually taking the time, the effort, and spending the money to do this for its public outreach. I understand why they push so hard for it now, and I think it is important. I want to point out to you a few things. You know, we have had an expert for almost a year, who I think you know. His name is Mr. David Ely, and he is, we've worked with this tool for the last 6 months. So there's a few questions I have looking at the 3 maps that you have. The first is, I note on the back of map 1, and I'm going to concentrate, by the way, my comments are going to be on the enforcement of the settlement agreement so that we comply with the settlement agreement, which calls for 2 majority-minority districts in the city. And that's our goal here. As far as the rest of the city is concerned, I am sure the council and you people will do the right thing. So as far as the back of the map that we have here, you said that map 1 and map 3 are the same. And I just have a question, because looking at citizen voting age population, on map 1 for District 1 you show 53% in percent Hispanic, and in map 3 you show 51%. Similarly, on the west side, your District 3 shows 50% on map 1 and 48% on map 3. And I'm not sure whether that was just simply either a mistake or you used the new census numbers on one map and they weren't picked up on the third map. That could be the reason. But our view is that with using the new numbers that we have, the numbers of 53 and 50 for map 1 would be the accurate numbers, the most recent numbers. Secondly, if you could put up map 3, or either map 1 or map 3, and look at the west side. Are you able to do that now or no? Or I can tell you about the issue. There's a very small issue, and that is, if you know the city of Santa Barbara, Harding School, interestingly enough, is divided in 2 by Robbins Street on the west side. And Mr. Ely has worked on that and has drafted a map. We'll submit it to the city, which actually takes in Harding School. That just actually bumps out 1 block, brings Harding School into the west side, since the citizens of the west side's children go to that school, and we would want the entire school on the west side. The other is on the east side, District 1. Do you have a laser pointer?
Yes.
Can I use that? Thanks so much. So on the east side, the West Beach, strike that, the East Beach volleyball courts and the Clark Estate, those are included in your West Side district? Is that my understanding? Because it's not clear from looking at the map. On your maps 1 and 3, are the East Beach volleyball courts included and the?
I believe so.
Okay. It looks like that, but it's hard to tell by looking at the map that I have here, because the maps I have here seem to indicate that the zoo is not, and I understand that. So that would be in District 4. Now, if you could look at, could you put up your district plan 2? We have real concerns about this meeting the terms of the settlement agreement, and let me point out to you why. So if you look at the issue of majority-minority, which is part of the settlement agreement, which we've all agreed upon, that shows 45% on the West Side district, which clearly is nowhere near 50%. And that happened because you did 2 things in creating this map, or whoever created it, or asked to create it. One, you included from the Mesa the students that live in the apartments down in the Ladera area, and took in the entire city college. 2 things. One, that diluted the votes of the minority in that, the majority minority in the West Side in the districts that you have in map 1 and 3. And 2, it is not part of the general plan neighborhood. If you look at your general plan neighborhoods, it's clearly not even part of the general plan neighborhood there. 3, if you really know the city well, you know that this is traditionally known as the Mesa area. All these people shop in the Mesa, they live in the Mesa. There's now a newspaper in the Mesa called the Mesa Newspaper, or the Mesa, I forget what it's called. So this is classically Mesa area. And the only reason anybody did put this in this was, I think, to dilute it, which is in violation of what the agreement we have with the city is. Also, by picking up the area all the way to Las Positas here along the freeway, you've included what's the area which is known as Pilgrim Terrace, which is almost entirely non-Latino area. And so that, by doing those two things, you have not only violated the spirit of the agreement, but taken neighborhoods that are not natural to the requirements of the CVRA. So we are against MAP 2. Finally, I just, on another point, if you look at I just caught this just looking at it. District Plan 3. This is just, I've been in the city for 40 years, so it's just my knowledge. This area here is really geographically pretty much on a hill, and the area down below is below. So it is not a classic geographical neighborhood that would tie into Hidden Valley. I'm not saying it's critical. It's not. I just passed it on by looking at it. And these people tend to shop on the Mesa, consider them part of the Mesa, for whatever that's worth. So that's our input right now. I think generally from the standpoint of the plaintiffs, we are happy to continue to work with the city through this process. We appreciate the opportunity to speak on the process. We will work with you, and I believe you know Mr. Ely, yes. And we'll get that information to you from Mr. Ely, and we'd ask the city to truly consider using these maps without the dilution that's set forth in Map 2.
And is it correct that we can identify Mr. Ely's work as such on the website?
We have no objection to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, just a technical note. You mentioned he had drawn another map. There is functionality in the website to import a map that has been drawn in, his fancier software. It's not live right now because they don't have it ready. But if he just wants to send me the file, I can import it for him. He doesn't have to go through and draw everything. And that's true for anyone that has their own mapping software. They can send me an equivalency file. He'll know what that is, and I'll put it in. They don't have to redraw their work.
All right. This has been very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue public comment. If you do want to give public comment, well, first of all, if you do have a map that you want to give and you need to leave, we have Gwen Pierce here, who's our city clerk. You can give her your map. If you'd like to do public comment, please bring a speaker slip and then do state your name. The speaker slip just helps us make sure we spell it right in the minutes. So we'll just have you come in and kind of line up. Yes,
Christy,
how about that?
Christy, first let me address the downtown question that the last gentleman asked. If that's,
sure.
Do you want? Oh.
No. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I just noticed I was playing with the mapping. My name is Hillary Blackerby. I'll turn in a speaker slip after, but I was playing with the online tool, which is very interesting. It helps to get a tutorial usually before you play with it, so now it's good to see that I was doing most of the things right. With regards to City College campus, something that I noticed, because you'll click on a section and then it'll not necessarily always go just by street, split streets down the middle, that kind of southwestern half, so West Campus, if you click on the map, City College campus is in two pieces. Right. That on the west side of the campus, it takes in a weird, you can sort of see a little dog leg situation by Barranca and Oceano. Right. It's really weird if you zoom in how that takes it in. And it takes in a fair amount of people. And so if it's possible to maybe talk to SRI or whatever, maybe there's a reason, but it's a little strange as to how that works. Have you noticed that?
Sharp eyes.
Yeah.
There are a number of spots where you'll get this. You get it in Plan 3 as well, 1 and 3 as well, with this kind of odd shape census block. Those are drawn by the Census Bureau. And some of them were drawn long ago, before the current houses were built in unusual patterns. And unfortunately, that's where we get the population counts. So to be sure of our population numbers and equal population, we have to follow, most of the time, the census geography. It's very hard to divide those pieces up, but that's why there is that way. It is technically possible at the end of this process to divide that. So you can actually send a note saying, I like this seat, but cut it behind the houses instead of on the street, which would be the case there. And you'll see these notes on 1 and 3 is actually the plaintiffs, or not the plaintiffs, these maps. And what he was talking about, what Mr. Capello was talking about over here on the West End, is we're actually looking at dividing blocks, a couple blocks, where the block is both in the flats and up on the hill, or things like that. So we are looking at doing that. You can't do it in the online system, but when you submit it, feel free to put a note in there saying, this is as close as I could get, but please divide this block.
Right, because I mean, you could be cutting up a community of interest or whatever, some of the other criteria by doing that. So
exactly.
It's good to know that it can be refined.
Yeah, we can fix it in the final resolution. We can't do it in the census data. And that's why maps 1 and 3 actually differ from the PDF maps that you have versus the online maps, because we can't divide those proposed divisions online.
Thank you.
Still morning. Good morning. I'm Susan Shank, co-president speaking for the League of Women Voters. I'm also a member of the committee that was formed after the League's annual meeting last year to consider whether we want to change our longstanding local position that supports at-large elections of Santa Barbara City Council. We've been studying this issue since last summer and understand that under the California Voting Rights Act, the city was in a difficult position. Now I want to just say a couple words about League history. I should have said initially, I'm not a mapping expert. I put a note on my pad of paper to talk to my daughter, who will be able to help me with this. I think it's generational. Okay. Little history. Nationally, the League has worked to foster civic engagement and enhance access to the vote since we were founded in 1920. Over time, our work has evolved from efforts to gain and foster women's suffrage to ensuring that all eligible voters, particularly those from traditionally underrepresented and underserved communities, including first-time voters, non-college youth, new citizens, minorities, the elderly, and low-income Americans, have the opportunity and information to exercise their right to vote. That's the history. Today we want to discuss how the newly required districts might be set up here in Santa Barbara. We think that everyone is clear, particularly after this morning's presentations, that whatever the city does, it must meet the requirements of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And as we heard, that law requires even population numbers in each district for the areas to be as contiguous as possible, and with the communities of interest kept together, again, as much as possible. And as we also learned, there are computer models that can efficiently make these basic decisions for a government, and then the final boundaries can be worked out by the council with citizen input. The League of Women Voters worked closely with the California Redistricting Commission back in 2011 and 12, I believe it was, and we support their approach. However, the process took a great deal of time and money, and we understand the city may have only a short period of time to prepare for district elections. We agree with the cause organization, formerly called Pueblo, that it would be much better to hold the first election in 2016, but the settlement may not permit that. The League will want to see a fair, transparent, and nonpartisan process to create the 6 districts. We know the city will want that also. The local league has previously supported having the city change to even year elections, another cause recommendation, and we continue to do so. But we understand that it may not be possible during the change to district elections and the complication of changing council members' terms of office. These are all extremely important decisions with long-range consequences. Some of them may require changes to the city charter and a vote of the people. We want the city to have time to work out some of these issues, to work these issues out carefully. Since the League was originally founded to help women learn and be ready to vote, we have extended that educational function to all underserved groups that need help to understand the process. For that reason, we publish ballot measure information in both English and Spanish and work to help register minority voters. The League itself has a strong position on diversity, which encourages minority persons to serve on government boards, commissions, and councils. We will continue to work towards that goal. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mary O'Gorman, and I'm speaking as an individual and currently residing in the 1500 block of West Valeria, where I have for the last almost 10 years. And that's one of the many areas that will essentially be disenfranchised no matter what happens here. And I accept that. It's happened. I respect some of the plaintiffs very much, and I hope that your goals are achieved. What I want to do now is, and also thank my good friends on the council for having this opportunity, but I must say it's a little bit like telling children you can have Brussels sprouts or asparagus, and you have to eat one. That's what it feels like. This is not really the public engagement process. But that being said, if the council truly does, if your goal is to increase voter participation and civic engagement, then please do everything you can to make sure that we can go to even year elections. I've spent most of the past 40 years in this area working on city or county elections, and I can tell you that voter turnout it's like night and day. And by the way, you can get voter information across the street, or I'm sure the city has it for the the more recent elections. So I just urge you to do what you can to move to even year elections as quickly as possible. And also, I'll work on some maps. It doesn't sound like, especially after hearing Mr. Capello, that we're really going to have much choice. It might be like what size asparagus we eat, but that at least some of our neighborhoods that may not seem like communities of interest to you are kept together. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Diane Fox, and I have a question rather than a comment, but it ties into many of the things that I've heard here today, which are, this is faster than we've ever had to do it. Why the haste? Why can't we take time to really hear from people and to get that input in? What's driving the haste?
What's driving it is the plaintiffs and the trial court's determination that if there was going to be a district election remedy, it would be implemented this November.
Non-negotiable.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And just to relate to that, to get it in place for this November, the county registrar needs the lines by June or July. So that, is it April here? Oh, wow. April.
Hi, I'm Dick Flax, and I'm speaking as a board member of CAUSE. As you probably know, CAUSE is one of its primary objectives is to increase the representation and empowerment and participation not only of people in the Latino community and other ethnically disenfranchised or underrepresented groups, but other constituencies like working people, renters, young people. It's one of the reasons that we support even-year elections and have made that the center of our concern in this whole controversy. I'm very gratified that the League Women Voters is strongly urging this, and other groups as well. So I think it's incumbent on the council to figure out the best way in which we can hopefully move in that direction. It's disappointing that it's not part of the settlement. There were other communities, Palmdale, Visalia, where the court ordered even-year elections as part of the settlement. I'm not sure I understand even why that has not been central to this, because in the fall election, with only 3 districts up, the entire city will not be caught up in the electoral process by virtue of the district elections. I'm worried that if we put the even-year question on the ballot in a very low turnout election, paradoxically, a measure designed to increase turnout will be voted on by the relatively small number of people who will be turning out in 2015. So this is a disturbing piece of the matter. I'm sure Cause and other groups will be working hard to try to get people registered and get people to turn out, but it's going to be very uphill. There's nothing else really on the ballot in 2015 except these district elections. One other question I had is, although the mandate has to do with Hispanic population percentages, you do have the data on voter turnout and related kinds of measures of participation. Can we imagine, or is this a good argument for the district lines to try to maximize not only percentage of the voting age population, but percentage of the registered population and related kind of measures? Is that something that people should be looking at, given that turnout and participation issues are so central to this?
I think we are somewhat constrained by what's described in the settlement agreement as the party's intention. And that intention is to have 2 majority-minority districts where the majority is Latino citizen voting age population. So I think Mr. Flax, the other criteria you're describing could be considered, but not in a way that would prevent us from getting to the majority-minority districts.
Good morning. My name is Robert Burke. I'm representing myself. I deeply resent not having a vote for how I vote. And I'm wondering what the hurry-up is all about. Too much talk never broke a democracy. I want to see more discussion. There was, in Santa Paula, not too many years ago, the Department of Justice challenged them for violating the Voter Rights Act of 1964. And there was a lady who wrote a PhD dissertation on that. And she did a very in-depth study. It was very thick. And I'm going from memory. What she found was that Latino was not a designation that was useful for deciding how people voted, and that age was a more determinative factor. So I challenge whether having this city divided up on districts along Latino lines is appropriate. Is it real science or is it junk science? Whether you are dividing up a city or any voting area, whether for one group of people or against another group of people, or because you're trying to balance a situation, it's still gerrymandering. I also question how much the redistricting would motivate people to vote. There's a logical fallacy called, it slipped my mind. But it says that the fallacy is that what is true of the whole is true of a part of the whole. So you take like a car engine. A car engine is heavy. Well, that means that the carburetor is heavy. No, that's a logical fallacy. So I'm wondering if we will achieve the goal of greater voter participation, which I support, no matter where you come from or what language you speak. I'm wondering if we will, if the goal of having greater voter participation will flourish or not. And has there been science on this in other jurisdictions where this has happened? And did it happen or not? So my question is, I think there's real cause for concern, at least with me, that we're splitting the city up in districts based upon possibly erroneous information. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Greg Freeland, and I represent Carlos, but also myself. I certainly support the arguments that have been made for even year elections to maximize the turnout, especially if you were talking about empowering the Latino vote. But I also see a situation here where we don't want to dilute the Latino vote because there are a lot of at-large issues that impact the whole community, including the Latino community, that might be very good, for instance, like minimum wage laws, environmental laws, and so on. And also, given the size of the Latino population in the city, will their vote be diluted if they now can only vote for one candidate or two in their district, instead of having the opportunity to vote for two or three candidates citywide, with the possibility of actually electing 3 or 4 Latino candidates to the city council? That possibility exists when you have a large population. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lucas Zucker. I represent CAUSE, formerly known in Santa Barbara as Pueblo, which is the largest organization that has been working to register and turn out Latino and other underrepresented voters in Santa Barbara for many years. I want to first address how even year elections does tie into district elections. First off, without a move to even year elections, district elections by itself will not solve the primary issue of underrepresentation here. As you can see in these districts, you can have districts that are 60-something% Latino population, but only 40-something% Latino registered voters, and in an odd year election, actually only 20-something% Latino voters who turn out. So clearly, without a move to even year elections, there may still be a lack of underrepresentation of Latino voters, even in those two majority Latino districts. Also, Santa Barbara is a smaller city, as some have mentioned, so you could see on the east side and west side districts with incredibly low turnout in an odd year election, 2,000 or less voters actually turning out, and potentially a candidate could get elected if there's a broad field with only a few hundred votes, potentially not really reflecting the majority of the population of that district. But regardless of its impact on districts, even year elections is just a no-brainer. It saves money, it improves voter turnout, and it promotes diverse representation. I also want to comment on the district lines themselves. So CAUSE works to ensure fair representation for underrepresented groups such as Latinos, but also young people, low-income families. And so what we see here is, in addition to the east side and west side majority Latino districts, which are of critical importance, there's also the importance of the other downtown flatland areas that are that have a population that's diverse. It has a significant Latino population, while not being a majority. It's still a significant population, and that population is also overwhelmingly younger, more likely to be renters, tenants of multifamily apartments, lower income, transit dependent. And these issues, youth issues, public transit, tenants' rights, workers' rights, immigrants' rights, these are issues that consistently come before the city council and city decision making. And so these areas need to be represented by a council member. So we should look at that as well in drawing the districts, as well as the east side and west side majority Latino districts. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out. A little taller here, thank you. I was actually one of the candidates in this election that was, whatever it wasn't very much of an election. And part of the reason was the district boundaries, but the real reason that people aren't turning out is because of the actual structure of the elections. And the science is behind changing the way the money flows in and out of the election process. I personally was in this room and spoke Spanish during one of the debates. The next day, I went to the Santa Barbara Club in Santa Barbara, and I was asked to leave the club. I was not invited to the debate by a white man in a business suit. That's how politics really works in Santa Barbara. And part of it is that your Police Officers Association is one of the largest contributors to the election process. They're also currently pursuing gang injunctions against some of the Latino residents. So you have this distrust between polarized sections of the city, and you have a lot of money flowing in from very small groups that dominate the election process. So my recommendation was at the last debate was that we move towards what Arizona has, where you have small contributions, $5 at a time, that add up to candidates qualifying for the ballot and getting matching funds so that the candidates have equal financial power to represent themselves in the election. They get equal airtime, their voice is heard more equally across the city. And frankly, this map they drew up is a hasty representation of Santa Barbara. If you've actually lived here for a long time, you know that most of our neighborhoods are surrounded by a commercial strip of businesses or schools or churches or whatever it may be. And so the lines, to me, should be more rounded, not straight lines drawn down a street. And I think if you walk the neighborhoods and you understand Santa Barbara, that's more of how Santa Barbara is. You have Bungalow Haven, or you have the east side, or you have the west side. And I also would like to see that, again, it's based upon where the residents live and not where you're trying to get tax revenues, et cetera. But I just don't think that people have spent enough time on this. And there can be nothing more important than making sure that our children have proper representation. So I ask you to not just look at the map boundaries, but to also look at the financial side of the campaigns. And that, I think, is what was really holding back the Latino populations and other populations from being allowed to be represented in these elections. And so if we want to have a more democratic process, I urge us to dig a little deeper and change the city charter and the municipal code to represent fair elections. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Have a great day.
Would you mind to put up the map that was, I think, either the third? Yeah, that's fine. My name is Sharon Byrne, and I, like Mary O'Gorman, live in one of the districts that's been disenfranchised historically and is going to continue to be so under this map. One of the concerns I have over time is something that both Barry Capello and Cause have brought up, and that is we're working off of 2012 voter turnout data, and we're working off of 2010 census data, I'm assuming, in drawing these lines. So the neighborhood that I live in happens to be in a lot of transition and is steadily seeing an influx of City College students residing in the area. And so I don't believe that even the 2010 census data is an accurate reflection of who's moved in the last 4 years. And so my feeling there is that I was wanting to ask the question of how long will we be locked into maps given that kind of transition?
I'll take the map question. Let me take the how long we will be locked into the maps question. Another feature of the settlement agreement that I didn't mention at the outset is that for the 2020 census, the city will be forming an independent redistricting commission consisting of 3 retired judges who will do the mapping one time only in 2021. The theory behind doing that is that should in this relatively quick process we're doing now, we find that we've made any serious mistakes, the judges would be able to clean that up in 2021 when the census data are available.
Thank you.
Hello. My name's Shane Stark, District 2. I'm not crazy about this process. It's awful short to really do a good job and get out in the communities, but I understand you did the best you can under the circumstances, and I congratulate you on having as much public process as you did. I've got a handy-dandy memo that I did for the League of Cities, League of Women Voters Committee, wrong entity, which I'm going to give to Christy, and you can distribute as it want. It deals with the larger issues, which are, I think, very interesting, but pretty much moot. What I want to address to the council and the city staff is do not neglect the transition issues. I think it would be well served to have some sort of task force to look at all the various questions and consequences that are likely to come up when you integrate the rest of the city government. You haven't changed the council member form of government and how the city council members are voting for projects in the interest of the entire city. With this district system, give serious thought to how you appoint commission members, how the lines of communications are, because there are going to be issues and problems, and I urge you to get on top of them as well as having this districting process. I have a couple of technical questions which I think you can answer. I notice there's no help button on this thing. So if hypothetically a technologically obsolete person such as myself wanted to find out in the middle of the thing, you got to go to the PowerPoint. Is that correct?
Well, the PowerPoint will be available, but there is a help button. I mean, it's hidden a little bit.
Yeah. I should tell you that I wear out the help button on most of my computers.
Yeah, right up here in the top right.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. That's enough. That's enough questions. Thank you very much.
My name is Bonnie Raisin, excuse me, and I speak for myself. A band of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of us in the 90s wanted district elections desperately, and it was really grassroots, as this has been also. But today I feel nothing but gratitude. I'm a little disappointed that only 3 districts will be on the ballot. But in a perfect world, this is not possible according to the mandates of the court. But I look forward to the time when, I have laryngitis, I'm sorry. I look forward to the time that people who run in a district of 14,000 will be able to know their neighbors, walk house to house, and actually discover what the real needs are of those people. This is the essence of district elections, in my view, is the communication between the leaders and the people that they live amongst. So I just want to congratulate the efforts of the recent committee, and although I like to think that skin color is only one part of this effort, that basically it's the democratic process of representation that is important here. And so I am grateful, and it finally, after 20 some odd years, this is going to be a reality. And I think those of you who have reservations about it, I think you should be open-minded and know that this is a plan that the city will eventually, I think, be satisfied with. I apologize for my voice. I don't know where the laryngitis came from. Talking too much, maybe, but thank you very much for all your efforts.
Just some wrap-up comments from after listening to what many of the citizens said. Barry Capello on behalf of the plaintiffs. One, with regards to the majority-minority districts, the purpose of these districts, of course, is to comply with the California Voting Rights Act. That's why it's being done. Why it's being done in the manner it's being done is because it's been too long that these districts have not been formed to solve the problem in the city of Santa Barbara. That's why it's being done now. It's not being rushed. It's that a large number of people have been disenfranchised for many, many years, too many years. So we're not taking the time to talk about it anymore. It called for action, and that's what has been done. And the city council is doing everything they can to address it in a democratic way, and I'm very impressed with what they've done. Number two, if you can, Mr. Johnson, we would like the tool in Spanish. I understand your time frame and your time limits, but to the extent that you can do something with that or the website in Spanish, it would be very helpful to us. Three, just on a couple of comments, just so people have the understanding that this has been a very complex lawsuit. The council's had a lot on their plate. We've had a lot on our plate. There's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, many issues which don't necessarily go to the heart of the issue here. Even year elections was something I believe several people have spoken to. We have always been in favor of even year elections. It's just not something that was able to be negotiated at this time because of the many moving parts. But the council can know, the citizens can know, that our plaintiffs and our constituency will support even year elections when and if the council gets to that. Finally, Shane Stark spoke, and I don't know if you all know this, but Shane Stark was the county counsel for Santa Barbara for many years and devoted a lot of time and effort to protecting the county. He made a comment which is, of course, near and dear to our heart. At some point in time, the council is going to have to address the issue. Districts were something the city has had for many tens and tens of years, decades. This is not new to the city. It's new since the 60s, but it's not new to the city of Santa Barbara. In order to protect and encourage each district to have a sense of empowerment, council members were given the opportunity, the power, to pick a commissioner for the various commissions. And that's something that the council should definitely be considering once we do have district elections. Thank you.
Let me just, on the Spanish question, just mention, like I said, the site we finished at 9:30 last night, so the city is going to translate my how-to slides, so those will be available in Spanish, and that'll help. ESRI and the technical side, it would be a year-long project and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Understood.
But we will get that how-to in the Spanish, and as I mentioned, Mr. Levitt is available to talk to anyone, and he's fluent in Spanish.
Well, that would help a lot. We would appreciate that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but maybe it needs beating. The point of this whole exercise, and the point that the plaintiffs have made repeatedly, is to increase A, representation from the Latino community among elected officials, and B, civic participation, particularly on the part of the Latino community. It has been demonstrated in city after city, time after time, that the best and most effective way to do that is by having even-year elections. The difference between even-year and odd-year turnouts can be enormous, can be significant in close races and not such close races. And there is no question that an even year, particularly a presidential year or even the congressional year elections, gets civic engagement from everybody. It's on the television all the time. It doesn't require great expenditures to even tell people that there's an election, which an odd year election does. And the fact that this whole issue is going to be decided at an odd year election when there is nothing else on the ballot but this smacks to me of a kind of cynicism, saying to the plaintiffs, oh, okay, you want this, we'll give you this, but we'll put it at a time when nobody's paying attention and goodness knows how it's going to turn out. And if it loses, then, it won't be our fault, and you can't blame us. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the way, as I say, it smacks to me. So it smacks to me, and I've smacked the dead horse enough, and thank you.
Lindsay Baker, speaking for myself. I am, however, a member of the League of Women Voters and on the committee studying district elections. We have not heard definitively from the city demographer that there is a disenfranchised class, protected class, since this matter was handled in closed session. May we have a response to that?
Yes, I need to take it. I recognize the desire to know whether there is racial polarization or whether there is vote dilution. Those are conclusions that a court would reach if we went through with the trial. It's not the standard for settling a CVRA case. The city has not admitted the existence of racially polarized voting, and it won't. We don't know that until a court tells us that, and here a court is not going to tell us that. What we do know is that in Santa Barbara, the record of city and school district elections is that some Latinos can win and others cannot. It's that simple. The settlement is motivated by a combination of factors, including costs, and we do know, as Mr. Capello said, that district elections worked well in Santa Barbara in decades past, and they can work well again. So that's about as far as I'm really able to go in answering whether the core facts exist that would lead a court to order district elections. We're avoiding that decision by settling the case.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lanny Ebenstein, and I'm a longtime advocate of district elections. And just a couple of comments. The first is that even this week, since the announcement of the settlement was made, I've sensed a real excitement in some of the districts about the possibility of electing their own members. And I think it's going to be a very interesting city council race this November. And it's something that's going to be good for the city of Santa Barbara. It's going to lead to more diversity on its city council from a number of perspectives, and I think that's healthy to have a city council that represents all of Santa Barbara. My question is specifically regarding the different maps, 1, 2, and 3. If people and organizations have suggestions on what the maps should be, where should they send those comments and so forth to?
If you, let me see, if you just grab it's the city clerk's office.
Okay.
And if you grab the paper map, the email address and fax number and physical address are all right on the paper map.
Okay, very good. And then the one general comment that I wanted to make specifically on district lines is that one thing that I noted is that school boundaries don't seem to be taken into account as included as to where do you draw a line in terms of, and my own feeling is that it would be great if to the extent possible district lines could reflect school boundaries in the city of Santa Barbara, because I think that would help to build neighborhood identity and contiguity around one of the really important institutions. And it's something that both with respect to elementaries, junior highs, and high schools, there are certain lines that often line up on a K-12 basis that really do help to create a line that I think should be considered when drawing the lines. And once again, while we're some ways away from those points of discussion on more detail, I'm in district numbers 4, which borders the East Side district. I'm really suspect of area north of Alameda Padre Serra and Eucalyptus Hill being in the East Side district. I think that's something that at some point in time should fall out. And on the West Side district too, my feeling is that Carrillo Street is probably a better line than currently drawn. And likewise on some of the North Side districts, there's concerns there. I'm sure these are very important questions, though, and as just one quick aside too, is that when Santa Barbara City College redo its boundaries after the 2000 and 2012, it was something that there was an outside consultant brought in, and it was a very fair process. But at the same time, my feeling is that to try to understand community neighborhoods of interest is something that will involve genuine consideration, and that looking at school boundaries is something that would be helpful in drawing district lines for the city of Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Let me just address that one point of that actually has been mentioned before, and we're trying to get those borders into the system. Just haven't had time this week. If we can get them, they will appear under this little diamond or triangle here, where you see the neighborhood list. We'll add the school boundaries there as soon as we can get them.
Okay, great, very good. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joey McKay, and I'll give you a form at the end. So there's been a lot of discussion about the even-year elections, and I'm confused about who makes that decision and when it can be made, what kind of discussion has been going on about it, and is it too late to have it be part of the agreement, the settlement agreement, or is that something that the council can just vote on? Is that something the voters will vote on? Thank you.
Even-year elections are up to the voters to decide, and the council could, or the people could, place a measure on the ballot for this November to decide whether to go to even-year elections. But it's not something that the council alone can do because it's ingrained in the city charter, and that requires voter approval for amendment.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap the meeting up. Can you get the slide of the schedule back up there, Doug, if you could? So this was just the first meeting in a series of civic engagement meetings. Just to remind you, this was community workshop number 1. The public input period starts today through the website, or if you're not comfortable with the website, you can use the paper and pen tool. There are extra copies up there, and submit it to the city clerk's office. We're hoping to get the website input by March 13th, and the paper and pen input turned into the city clerk's office by March 12th. So that we have time to compile all of the results and bring it to the workshop on March 18th, so that we will have sort of the results and we'll have the opportunity to give the public to weigh in again on the input that we've received so far. Once we've done that, we will be bringing the final results of those first 2 meetings to the City Council on the 24th for the first discussion in the formally with the City Council, and then again we'll have a special meeting on Monday, March 30th for the City Council to deliberate on the district boundaries. So we'll see you at the next meeting. Please do put in input through the online tool or the paper tool, and we'll see you hopefully on the 18th.